I'd like to call this meeting to order of the Geneva Historic Preservation Commission for Tuesday, April 18th, 2023. I would start with a roll call.
Hartman,
Here.
Jensen. Here. McManus.
Here.
Solomon. Here. Stazen.
Here.
Zinke. Here. Zelmer.
Here. We have a quorum, thank you. The first item on our agenda, second item on our agenda is the approval of meeting minutes for February 22nd, 2023. Does anyone have any revisions they would want to make to those meeting minutes? If not, can I get a motion to approve?
I second that.
Okay. Yeah.
Hartman,
Sure. Go ahead. Go ahead.
give me a- Hartman,
Aye.
Jensen. Aye. McManus,
Aye.
Solomon,
Aye.
Stazen,
Aye.
Zinke. Zelmer.
And I have to recuse, or I was abstaining also. Okay, motion passes. Okay, the next item on our agenda is the continuation of the public hearing. Before we start that, is there anyone that needs to recuse themselves? Let the record show that Karen Zinke recused herself and has left the room. Okay. This meeting is a continuation of the public hearing for HPC cases number 2022 and 079 and 2022 080 from January 18th, 2023. That was duly noticed and subsequently continued per city ordinance to allow for additional public testimony and in anticipation of receiving a completed professional review of the petitioner's submitted pro forma statement. The commission is reconvening this public hearing to hear from the consultant and, if time permits, additional public testimony for and against the proposed request concerning demolition and de-designation of the historic landmark located at 4 East State Street. In consideration of other business before this commission, this public hearing will proceed no later than 9 p.m. With that, I will turn it over to Mr. Lambert.
Thank you, Chairman Zelmer. At the request of the Historic Preservation Commission, the City of Geneva has retained the consulting team of Tesca Associates and the Planera Group to provide an analysis of the applicant's submitted pro forma statement. We invite Scott Goldstein of Tesca Associates and Terry Haymaker of the Planera Group to come forward to present their analysis, after which they will distribute their written report that will be entered into the official record of these proceedings. However, I will be providing the Commission a copy of the presentation that you can follow along and make notes on. So at this time, if you would like to come to the podium, I will get these handed out.
Do I need to swear them in?
I will. I mean, it's just a presentation.
Okay.
Yeah, go ahead.
Thank you.
Yeah,
Typically do that.
not typically, but,
No,
okay.
can any of the citizens of Geneva see one?
It's the same presentation that's going up on the screen.
So no.
Well,
Okay. Yeah, but I can't see it.
Okay. If you could state your name for the record, ma'am.
Terry Haymaker with the Plenaire Group.
Great. And then,
Thank you. Thank you very much for having us here.
Thank you
It's a
for
ple-
coming.
Sure, sure. It's a pleasure to be here and to talk about this project with you. So this is an overview of the presentation we're going to give today. We'll walk through all of what you see on the screen right here, starting with our approach and methodology. Like, how did we jump into this project? Oh, should I move this closer? Is that better? Okay, it sounds the same to me, so I'm glad. Okay, it's better? Oh. Is that any better?
maybe just a little.
Okay,
Yeah,
that
that's
sounds better. Okay, I'm just going to lean in then, okay. Okay, so I'll just start by saying, just move the podium too. Okay, start by saying that, talk to you about our approach and methodology. We're going to discuss that. How did we, jump into this project? How did we take the process that we went through to come up with the results that we have? The project concepts, we're going to just set the stage for everybody at the beginning of this so that as we continue through the presentation, there's some common terminology that we'll all be referring to. Highlight our findings. We'll jump a little bit into grants and sources of revenues, bringing together some historic preservation examples that are similar to this project. Then we will switch and dive into the applicant's pro forma, which we reviewed and analyzed, as well as some alternative scenarios that are tied back to that pro forma and that project. And then we'll wrap up with a summary of key findings. So as was stated, we were retained by the City of Geneva to evaluate this application for demolition. We used as our guiding principle the Ordinance 10-6-10. The demolition will be considered when, only when all other redevelopment options for a building have been exhausted. We kept that in our guidepost as we continued through this process. So Tesca Associates and the Plenaire Group, that's Scott and I together, we looked at the pro forma, we analyzed it, we did research, building on our internal knowledge and experience in the development world, but jumping in and talking with external resources as well, developers, historic preservation experts, to supplement what we already know and bring to the table for this project. And then we did consider some possible alternatives. You'll see those as we move through the later phases of this presentation. So we did some preliminary investigation of possible alternative uses for the building and the site. These build on the work that was done previously through the charrette. Then we analyzed the pro forma and these alternative scenarios, basing that on the real estate industry standards and typical approach to projects. And there is no one way to do a redevelopment project. There's many different ways, so we highlight those as we go through this. And the report that we've submitted as well dives into that in deeper level. We are giving you the highlights here today to set the stage for that. So this is what I mentioned before, is project concepts. Lots of times in real estate development, as people know, terms are thrown around, jargon is used, acronyms are used. So at any point during this presentation, if Scott and I start using acronyms or jargon, please let us know, because we want to make sure we're making things clear. So we jumped into that a little bit with this pro forma. That's a phrase that can contain a lot of different elements. Sometimes it's just a construction budget. In this case, when we're using the phrase pro forma, it means construction budget, fees and professional service costs, operating costs, once the building is up and running, the costs associated with that. Any project funding sources, I'll talk about that on a later slide, and then the financial returns. So just keeping in mind that all of those elements are included in the phrase pro forma when we use that as we go along. Net operating income, pretty straightforward. This is the income, I'm sure everybody operates in this world, but this is the income that is rent less any operating expenses. But that phrase NOI, you'll see that come up in the later pro forma pages. And then return on investment, this is what a developer will get back, what returns a developer will see from the equity that he puts in or she puts in. Developers put equity into a project at the onsite. then later there's a cash flow that stems from an annual cash flow that stems from that project. So you'll see this is a number that we'll get into as we move through the pro forma analysis. We use the term pro rata cost sharing. This has to do with large development sites. So when you have a large development site, it's often broken into smaller pieces, bite-sized pieces for development. But the site work that needs to take place on that larger development site, how that is divided up between individual buildings on a larger development site, that's important. And it's important to this project, and it's important in general for any larger site developments. And then typical project funding sources. We've kind of highlighted them there. Equity and loan, those are the two big funding sources that go into every project. We're also going to talk about grants and public incentives and historic tax credits that also are available to this, or could be considered available for this project. So I'll just highlight some of the research that we undertook for this effort and what we found and what was supplemented from the development experience that we've seen so far. I mentioned it before, phasing and shared costs. So larger development sites are phased in multiple steps to balance the access to capital as well as any costs that get incurred for each individual project. If you have a very large site, you may or may not be able to undertake it all at once to secure funding or just to manage the construction costs as a part of it. And then, so jumping into the phrase infrastructure, which can mean anything associated with the site, utilities, water, grading of the site to make it even, landscaping, all of those site-wide infrastructure costs can be implemented for the entire site, or they can be done in phases with each individual project. And development sites can take, or development projects can take any variation of those as well. And so what we normally see is that in that pro rata approach to development site costs, that each individual site takes down its own fair share, so to speak, of the infrastructure development costs. So if you have a large parcel and 1/4 of the parcel is allocated for one project, then 1/4 of those site development costs would be allocated towards that individual project. And there are several different ways to do that development-wise, depending on which site is going first. And so that's kind of an important consideration. Sometimes all the site development costs are attributed to the first phase. Sometimes it's a portion. When they are attributed to the first phase, it's often recouped through future development sites as they come online at that, again, that pro rata share. We talked a little bit about looked a little bit into public-private partnerships, which are such a successful way to do community development projects within a community. And they can, in that way, private development can be supported by a public entity with incentives that can make the project more economically feasible for the developer. It can also bring about more interest in a site from multiple developers if they recognize that there's some support from a municipality as well. And one of the things that we've seen industry-wide is that if a typical unsubsidized, typical market rate development might have a return on investment, again, that's that number I mentioned before, a return on investment between 18 and 20%. That number, keep that kind of in the back of your head because that's important as we get to later in the slides about the pro forma evaluation we did. Whereas a publicly subsidized project may have a lower return on investment, maybe 10 to 12. So that's important for you all to keep in mind as we move forward through that pro forma review. And that there's many public investment options that can support historic preservation. I'm going to jump into those next. And I think these are good images to show here to give people a feel for similar type projects. That Texaco Station in Decatur was renovated with support from the city there to preserve this. We're using it as an example because it's a small building, which is similar to the one we're talking about here for the application. And then when we're going back to the concept of phasing and shared costs, the renovated firehouse on the north, the picture at the top, it's part of a larger project where the firehouse renovation was the first project out of the ground. And because it was such a large site and had such strong potential for the future, the developer was able to undertake this renovation without needing any city assistance. So I think that's just important examples to jump into. Okay, grants and sources of revenue. So we mentioned local incentives. In the city of Geneva, there are several different incentives that are available through fee waivers or permit fee waivers or other incentives or support that the city can give as a part of a development project associated most often with new development on sites on vacant land. Tax increment financing, which you're probably very familiar with. I know the city of Geneva is very active with TIF projects. It's a great tool, again, to do community development work with either new site development work or historic preservation, renovation of existing building. And you really can get some good public benefits out of TIF projects. So historic preservation funding, there are 3 different types of funding sources that we are pulling together for this purposes today. There are other ones out there, but these are the ones that will be most relevant to this project. The first one are federal and state historic tax credits. These are programs that are in existence. They apply to buildings that would be on the National Register, which the application here, this building is not on the National Register. It would need to be submitted and approved for the National Register. And it's a way for tax credits to be issued to a development to then reduce the tax burden that an entity has, where they're successfully used across the country, but here in Illinois as well, is to identify syndication, tax credit syndication funding sources. So it brings equity right into the deal up front as a part of the project. The preservation easement donation is, if you have been involved at all with like a utility crossing your property, the utility gets an easement and they hold on to that so that you can't build on top of their utility. This is a very similar concept with a preservation easement donation. If a building is landmarked, the building owner will then give a donation to a nonprofit in the form of that value between what could be built if the building weren't landmarked and then the value of the building that remains. So it's a one-time donation that a property owner can take. That donation goes to an entity that then is responsible for making sure that that landmark building is preserved and maintained and stays a landmark building. So it's a partnership that occurs in that example. And then the Landmarks Illinois Historic Preservation grants, those are available. There's several different grants available. And where they're strong for a project like this is they help with planning funds. Those grants aren't available for new construction or renovation, I should say, renovation or construction costs, but they are available for planning costs. So when I mentioned before that the National Register is a requirement for the tax credits, those grants that are offered by the Landmarks Illinois programs could help defray the cost of applying for the National Register. So that's an example of that. The last 2 items, lost my button again here. Okay, all right. The Community Development Financial Institutions and the CPACE program. So CDFIs they're a funding entity, a financing entity, and they provide loans, access to capital for projects that have a public benefit or a community development benefit. So in the case of the example you can see right here, this is a nonprofit hub. So there's nonprofits in this building called the Nichols Tower, and it was funded in part by a CDFI who wanted to help preserve the building and support the nonprofits that are located in the building. So CDFIs bring a competitive lending tool to the table for folks who may or may not be able to have access to capital in other ways. The CPACE program, we have this highlighted here because it's really becoming a more popular tool now than it was before. And this provides financing, and a financing structure that is guaranteed and repaid with an assessment tied to the land. It's not tied to the revenue produced in a project, like most loans are tied to whatever revenue comes in. This is tied to the land. And the eligible financing costs include energy efficient building elements, which that can apply to new construction or it can apply to existing buildings and renovation. And we're all, this is a way to get a win in the climate and resiliency world that we live in right now. So when I talked about the beginning about how we looked at historic, possible uses for the historic building, we reviewed and looked at the recommendations and the ideas and the economic development assessment that was done as a part of the charrette. and really spent a little bit of time considering what else could go what could go in that building. You know, obviously office is what we're aware of being proposed for this building now. In the past, there's been conversations about retail, restaurants, any kind of indoor-outdoor space. Could this be an amenity space for any future residential or mixed-use project? Really looking at the diversity of options that are out there for a building like this. We also, you'll hear coming up in the next part of the presentation, we also looked at, for the full site, what possible uses could really, flourish on this site when it's developed in the future. Residential, a mixed-use project with some commercial or retail in it. Not so different from what you've seen in the charrette work that was done previously. So I'm going to turn it over to Scott to keep moving forward with the project presentation. Thank you.
What do I press? Okay. Hello, everyone. I'm Scott Goldstein, a principal of Teska Associates. We were fortunate to work with Terry and her group at the Planera Group. We were founded in 1975. We have offices in Evanston and Plainfield. We've done a lot of work in this area in Kane County, Geneva, Tri-Cities. And about half of our clients are private developers and entities, architects, lawyers, and about half public. So we're in this space of public-private partnerships all the time. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to give you a very high level right up front, go through all the details of methodology, and then circle back to what our conclusions were. The first is that a standalone project, as submitted by the applicant, we agree generally with what was presented, that it's a break-even scenario. Our numbers are a little bit different, but the standalone without significant public investment is essentially break-even. There wouldn't be a lot of economic incentive to do that project on its own. Wouldn't necessarily lose money, but it's essentially break even. We come down to about 1.4% annual return, so a very low return. But if that same standalone project happened with significant TIF investment that would cover the high cost of renovation of the building, the owner could see more like a 10% return, which is a pretty standard return for a public-private partnership. The reason you say, why would it be lower? That's because if there's public funds going in, that entity investing, the TIF district, wants to see a reasonable return, doesn't want to subsidize a project that could already happen in the market without any subsidy at all. That's why it's a little bit lower. And we do think that's possible at a 10% ROI, but that increment would not be generated solely by the historic building, it would be by the full site. And I'll come back to this in a minute. The third scenario is essentially a reduced version of what the final recommendations of the charrette were. That was a 5-story building. A lot of people in the community were not happy with the 5-story building. We looked at what if that building 20 units were cut off. It was a 4-story building, modest TIF amount. We'd see market rate returns of about 16 to 17%. We're in that market rate range that developers are looking for at that stage. And the last would be a 4-story building with a partial setback 5th story that would give additional revenue to the property owner, and we think that could be done to subsidize the historic building without any public subsidy. Essentially, the public subsidy would be the additional development right by being able to go a little higher. Again, it was on an earlier slide, we are not recommending any of these scenarios. Our task was to look at possible alternatives, not actually designing a project. Just want to make sure that that's what our assignment was. So first is looking at the applicant's pro forma. That's what was presented at the last meeting. It was a 1-page pro forma, and we're going to go through that table in the next slide. But there are 2 Altus Works numbers out there on construction costs. You may or may not be aware of that. One was about 1.1 million. One was about 1.4 million. When we compared it line by line, they're actually about the same. The 1.4 million includes a lot of the line items that were shown as separate line items in the applicant's submittal. So the total development cost is about the same in those 2 things. And I'll show you the exact numbers in a minute. As I said, we concur with most of the applicant's pro forma expense and operations estimates. The one exception we have is land cost. Terry said before, oftentimes the cost of a development are shown equally as a percentage of land. In this case, we don't think that that would be the way the market would treat this piece of property. Because of the landmark status of this building that's restricted, it doesn't have the same market value as the vested part of the property of the vacant land that's ready to build. So we thought that the $500,000 estimate was too high because, and it also has a sign on it offering the building for $1, and I don't believe there have been any offers. There's a lot of restrictions, and that's why we're here tonight, of looking at that site. But overall, most of the other assumptions we concur with. So our total development cost estimate is 1.9 million versus 2.3 million, largely due to the difference in land estimation. As I said a minute ago, our bottom line is we think it's about a break-even project. I think that the applicant said a 0.2%. We're at about 1.3% with a modest amount of TIF. So again, in the basic range of a break-even project. Let me just walk you through the numbers. And I'm not going to go through every number, but again, the first one, the construction costs, we're using the higher Altus Works estimate, which adds up with a number of other expenses to about 1.6 million. Loan fees and property taxes in the applicant, I'm not going the details are in the report, I'm not going to go through all of them. The applicant had shown 3 different tests for determining a loan. It ended up about $200,000 loan. It probably wouldn't make sense to take that small loan. So we questioned whether those fees would be in there. The developer fee of 10% is reasonable. So that would be one of the benefits of the project. In addition to the 1.4% a year, there would be an upfront 10% developer's fee. The land, again, I just mentioned, we think is above market value at $500,000. In terms of operations, what Terry showed is we looked at a variety of different uses of the space. At the end of the day, from an economic point of view, the applicant did show a market-based rent of $20 per square foot. That's right in the average range of State Street. We don't think that that rent would change radically of those different uses. So we're neutral on use, but we essentially concur that $20 per square foot would be a reasonable rent. It's currently owned by a foundation, so there's a question whether the foundation makes sense to pay itself. But in this case of just looking at this objectively, what that market rent would be, $20 seems high. The vacancy might be high if you have a single user. That might be high, but it's not a substantial amount of money. So we basically concur about $20,000 a year coming in rent. The estimated loan, we questioned whether it would be worthwhile to take that loan. Instead, our approach was to, and you'll see it in the next scenario, show how we could reduce the amount of equity required, thus meaning not needing to take the loan necessarily. So at the end of the day, as I mentioned before, so the applicant has not requested TIF funds formally or historic tax credits. We're not guaranteeing the tax credits. We have talked to a number of people. It looks like it could be on a path for the National Register and perhaps qualify, but right now there's 0 shown in there based on the applicant's submittal. So we're in about the same range. The developer said 0.2%. We're at about 1.3%. With some modest TIF that would be based on the amount of increment generated just from this particular building of about $200,000. Okay? Okay, so that was looking at the analysis of just a break-even standalone project. Now let's look at alternatives. Again, the ordinance talks about both the building and the site. We look at the full site. This is part of a larger parcel. So there's 3 scenarios, and we look at 2 options under each scenario. The first one is essentially the standalone project with different levels of TIF subsidy. Okay? That's the difference between 1A and 1B, and I'm going to go through these in a minute. The second is looking at a 4-story as-of-right development. As-of-right means that based on current zoning, you wouldn't have to do a planned development, for example, to do that. The property is entitled to 50 feet high with no setbacks. So quite generous zoning on the site that the property owner could take advantage. And we compared the difference in return with doing the historic renovation by building in those costs versus not doing the historic building. So we see, is there a difference between the return one way or the other? The last is doing a partial 5th-story setback so you wouldn't see it from State Street. And by providing that additional density, the question is, would that be enough to subsidize, essentially an internal subsidy in the project, the profit from the residential building, is that enough to cover the cost of the historic building? Now remember, I just said that the historic building is essentially break even. So the hypothesis is, does doing this building affect the finances of the rest of the project? And I think what we'll see is it doesn't, because it's break even unto itself. It's not really earning money, it's not really losing money. So it doesn't really affect the rest of the project. And I'll go through the numbers on it. So scenario one, again, is essentially the same scenario of renovating the historic building as a standalone. The difference is 1A is similar to applicant's submittal, completely on its own. It has to pay for the TIF investment based on its own increment, assuming it does continue to pay property taxes. So you get about $201,000 in increment. I think that's about 11% of the project. The city, by the way, sometimes goes as high as 30%. This would be 11%. It does assume some federal historic tax credits of about $190,000. 1.5 million equity, which is less than what was in the applicant's submittal. Again, that's about a 1.3% return on investment. Now, that could be added by things like the preservation easement. So think about what Terry said, that additional development potential that's not being built, that could be donated to Landmarks Illinois or another eligible nonprofit and take that tax advantage of those 3 stories of building that were not built. We did not estimate the cost. We're not experts in that. But there's a sizable benefit that could perhaps be accrued to the property owner from the historic reservation. Scenario 1B is essentially the same scenario, except it taps into the increment of the full site. The full site would generate about $5 million of tax increment. In this case, we said, well, what if the TIF paid for the extraordinary cost of the historic reservation of $1.5 million? That would be equal to 3.5% of the total development cost of the full site. Remember, the city sometimes goes as high as 30%. This would be nowhere near 30%. This would be 3.5%. But because it's a much larger project, it's able to generate that $1.5 million. So it'd have to be tied together, right? So if the city bonded, both of these projects would have to proceed together in a phased way like Terry was talking about, so the city would have guarantee of payment of the increment through the full site, or it could be done through other projects in the TIF district. It wouldn't necessarily have to be the same site. That's the easiest and cleanest way to do it. In that scenario, again, higher TIF investment, still has a little bit of federal historic tax credits, you're at the 10% return on investment. So you're at that typical range. But that's 10% only for the historic building. The rest of the project, we're going to see in the next scenario, is going to earn about 16 to 17% annually. So you're going from 1A, break even, to 1B, higher city investment, more return to the private owner. Okay? Let me keep going. So these are the numbers, just going through them like we did before. All the numbers on this page are the same. It's the same scenario, it's just funded differently. All the development costs are the same to renovate the building. Yes, it costs a lot of money to renovate the building because of the nature of the building. What's different here is we're not showing a loan for this particular part of the project because we've reduced the amount of equity. The big difference is in bold, right in the middle of the page there, estimated contribution from city TIF, $201,000 versus $1.5 million. $1.5 million sounds like a lot, but it's only 3.5% of the full site development. So it would be tied to that. So you'd have to have both parties agree. The property owner and the city would need to come together and say, does this work for both of us? Would the numbers be exactly the way I presented? Probably not. What we're trying to do is look at a scenario, not the final numbers on the deal. So the difference at the bottom, the 1A is essentially break even at 1.3%. 1B with more city investment comes out to a little over 10%, which again would be a typical range and doesn't mean that you couldn't get higher returns for the much larger residential development on the rest of the site. Okay? So the next scenario, as I mentioned, this is one of the drawings from the charrette. We're not recommending this design. You may like the design, you may not. We're just showing for about the amount of units. And what we're showing in pink is what this scenario would remove. So no fifth story, and the building on the left, that two-story wing, is at the site where the historic building is. So that couldn't be built either. So about 20 less units than was presented in the charrette. Again, we're not recommending this, we're just looking at this. This was part of the public record. How does this play out financially in 2023 versus 2019 when this was first done? So what we're comparing is there a difference in the return between doing the historic building or not doing the historic building with the same residential development built on the rest of the site? Same number of units either way. Now, I realize if you didn't do the historic building, would you be able to get a few more units in on that site? Probably yes, but we just wanted to look at apples and apples. And essentially what our hypothesis was, because the historic building is break even, it doesn't materially affect the return of the rest of the project. They're both between 16 and 17% return. Because multifamily residential development is very strong in Kane County, in Geneva. And so that is why it's being built, because it is a very much in demand for high-end rental development. The one on the left has a small amount of TIF and federal historic tax credits. The one on the right doesn't, because there's no historic renovation as part of that hypothetical example. So let me go through the numbers a little bit more. 2A has the 1.2 million of historic building renovation costs. Now that's a lower number you saw before, because a lot of the infrastructure expenses would be attributed to the rest of the project. Terry was talking about that early on. Sometimes they're attributed to the small site, sometimes to the full site. In this case, the total development cost of $42 million, $41 to $42 million already includes all those infrastructure investments for the site. So really, we're only looking at the renovation costs of the building. Again, $1.2 million is substantial for such a small building, but we didn't double count the infrastructure. We determined an estimate of the value of land. We looked at both 4 East State Street and 12 East State Street. Both of them were part of that charrette process. We understand that the property owner has a site control of the corner property as well at 12 East State. We estimate based on the information they provided of land value of comparable estimates that were in your submittal packet last month. We used those to determine the land value. If you looked at both sites together, we came up with estimate of $3.2 million. The residential development costs, essentially we prorated, we reduced the number of units, we then put an inflationary factor to bring it from 2019 to 2023, ended up being about $38 million. Total development costs about the same, $41 to $42 million. At the bottom, the net operating income, historic building, again, is the same number we showed before of $20,000. The NOI of the residential apartment rents, we looked at the for rent prices for other showing projects and other similar high-end rental projects in this very area. We looked at those rents, we multiplied it out by the number of units, and it's a healthy return of about $1.9 million of annual rent. Okay, so what does this mean? Commercial loan, obviously for a project this size, you're going to take a commercial loan. They're slightly different because one includes the historic building, one doesn't. So again, you're about $41, $42 million all in, a little bit of TIF, a little bit of historic tax credits. At the end of the day, you look at the equity that's needed is about the same, about $10.5 million either way, and the ROI based on that equity is about the same, 16.4, slightly lower than 16.65%. So you get a little bit more return without doing the historic building, but not a substantial difference. Because again, it doesn't change because the historic building is break even. So it doesn't really affect the rest of the deal one way or the other, just slightly, a little bit. Okay? The last scenario we looked at was what if the city contemplated, if the city came together, the developer, and pursued a planned development that went higher than 50 feet in part of the building. In other words, getting the potential of a partial fifth floor. And what does that do? We look with historic building on the left and without the historic building. And we're about one, here it's a little bit more different. The one with historic building is about 17.7% ROI versus a little bit over 1% more for the larger project. But 17.7% is certainly well within the range of a private market return. So I'll just go through these, and then I'm going to wrap up with the conclusions. The difference, again, between the 3A and 3B is with the historic building versus without. The same land values we saw before. Residential development cost is a little higher because it's a taller building. So the total development cost on 3A is about $45 million versus about $43 million without the historic building. You can see the net operating income at the bottom. It's higher than the last scenario because you've got more units in their penthouse units, so it's going to be a higher rent per square foot than lower floors. So, but again, in the range of about $2.2 million, $2.2 to $2.3 million in either case. You're going to take a commercial loan in either case. The annual payment based on that commercial loan, total estimated cost we saw before, about $45 million versus $43 million. In this case, no public investment at all. No TIF, no historic tax credits, clean deal. What is the city giving? The city's giving the right to build a taller building. But it could be designed in a way that you don't see it from State Street so it doesn't block your view to the downtown, to the courthouse as you're going west on State Street if they're set back. And I already gave you the spoiler. At the end of the day, about a 1% difference, but still almost 18% return on investment of a 4 to 5 story building with historic building. Again, could it be a little higher if you didn't have the historic building? Could you build a few more units where that's located? Yes, but we didn't look at that scenario because we're not designing the building for them. We're just looking at alternative uses of the land. Okay? I'm almost done. So what are the summary of key findings? The first is that a standalone reuse of the historic building as submitted by the applicant would provide break-even results of a modest return. The applicant said 0.2%, we're at 1.4%. I would say it's about the same range. We have a little bit more cushion in our numbers because of the reduced land cost. The second is that a public-private partnerships that provides $1.5 million in TIF investment from the city would yield a more acceptable return of about 10%. So if this was a priority for the city of Geneva to say, we're going to invest these TIF funds to really pay down these high costs of constructing the building, then the building on its own is possible to do without the rest of the site, except that you need the rest of the site to generate the increment, right? So you really would have to tie them together because if the city was going to bond, it needs a secure source of revenue. It probably doesn't want to do a general obligation bond for something like this. The third is that a 4-story residential development earns about 16 to 17% with or without the historic renovation. So we would argue that that cost is being internalized because, again, it's a break-even cost to the development. The profit is really in the rest of the site. It's not in the historic building. There's really not a lot of profit to be made there unless the city subsidizes that profit through a large TIF investment. And then the last is that I just covered. If the building was allowed to go to planned development or zoning variation for height variation to 58 feet rather than 50 feet, that additional development area would provide sufficient revenue, in our opinion, to cover those costs, and no TIF or historic tax credits would be necessary. Those would have the highest return of any of these scenarios. Based on this evidence, we find that there are financially viable uses for the site, but if and only if there's participation in the property owner in the city of Geneva to work out a way to work together to make this happen. Okay? Thank you.
That's a lot to digest in a short period of time. And none of us have seen this. So we were thinking that that it may be imperative that we take a little time to digest this information and have basically continue this public hearing until a date certain. And at that time, we would have questions regarding the report that was done. We'd be able to see the full report that was done, not just the Reader's Digest version of it, and be able to have comments that we would like to make and questions that we would have. Does the commission feel that that would be a good way forward? Don?
Yes.
Okay.
Could we also see the original pro forma?
the original pro forma is already in the public record, and we have that. That's, yeah, that already exists, and that's already in we already have that, so. Any other comments from the commission regarding that? Yeah.
Continue this hearing, it's part of it.
Yep, okay. Yeah. We do have the full report, and we will put that full report within the public record. Will it be available also?
I'll distribute it right now to the commission and the applicants, and then it will be available online.
Okay,
Just saw is also going to be available online.
okay,
So,
yeah, yeah. The presentation is also, will be available online in the same place as where the actual full report is put together. So what we're looking at is to a date certain of May 2nd, 2023. That does mean that we're going to be a little tight on making sure that everybody that says that it can be here from the commission can be here. But I think we will have a quorum at that time. I know that you're not available, right, Mr. Solomon? And I don't believe Jewel is available either. So, but that would leave 4 of us and would leave us able to have a quorum. Correct, Michael?
Yes.
Okay.
So we're looking at Tuesday,
May 2nd
2nd?
at 7 PM. With, it would be available online to be viewed so that Jewel and George can make a intelligent, we'll be able to view it after or during the proceedings.
So my question is, if I view it while it's actually going on during the proceeding, would I be able to participate?
So I'd have to, we can talk about that, I can talk about it.
So what our attorney has told us, it depends on the reason you're not able to participate in person, would
Okay.
depend on whether it meets the criteria for the Open Meetings Act.
Okay. Do I tell you that reason now, or do I tell you that in
We
private?
can talk after.
Okay.
Okay.
I wish I could say I was smart enough to know it off the top of my head, but I don't, so I'll have to look it up.
Okay. Is the applicant, is that a good date for you?
That is fine with the applicant, provided that the consultants can be here. Oh,
Oh, yeah, I'm sorry.
that's all right, that was my fault.
And you probably have to state your name.
I understand. Kate McCracken, McCracken, on behalf of the applicant. And, the May 2nd date works fine. We just need to make sure that that we have the author of the key findings in the report available as well. So that's really a function of you guys being available. All right, then, yeah, that's
Okay.
great.
Great, I just wanted to make sure that we're not heading down the road
No,
without,
I very much appreciate it. Thank you.
thank you. Okay,
Hey, Paul, real quick, so the original pro forma, is that something that's available online for viewing as well?
Yes, excuse me, the pro forma was included in the original January 18th packet.
Okay.
The links to that, yes.
Okay.
So, yeah, the
Thank
pro
you.
forma, I think that it's important that, just as a quick note, that the pro forma and also the Altus report,
yeah.
that
The cost,
those are all in the original application.
Right,
So they probably all have to be reviewed together.
yeah.
yeah, that'd probably be best to look at them side by side. Do you, I guess, I would like to get a motion from someone to,
So I would like to move to continue the public hearing for, what is this, 4 East State Street to Tuesday, May 2nd?
Second,
okay. I guess you could call the roll and we'll. No. Well, hold on. Yeah, if you could. Yeah,
Sorry, at the cost of violating Robert's Rules of Order, and I take full responsibility for this. Historically, my understanding is that our practice has been that when we receive letters from the public, that we will read those in at the first hearing that we actually have those. And so, Mr. Lambert has indicated that we received 2 of those letters, and he would read them into the record, and then they would become part of the public hearing record so that everybody would have them at this time. Now, we have had a motion and a second, and we are about to take a vote. And so that should be closed, but you can,
Can I rescind my motion or something?
you could actually, you have to make a motion to rescind your motion.
yeah.
So I move to rescind my motion for the continuance of the public hearing for Tuesday,
Withdraw
May
it.
2nd.
I would second that.
Okay, and then we need a roll call for that.
Hartman,
Aye.
Jensen,
aye.
McManus,
Aye.
Solomon. Stazen,
Aye.
Zelmer.
Aye, motion carries.
Just to clarify, Mr. Lambert would explain, he won't actually read the whole letter. He's going to read who they're from, and then the letters will be available online with everything else, so people can review them at their leisure.
Okay, Mr. Lambert, if you could,
Thank you, Chairman. So we've received a letter on March 27th from Carolyn Gangi, I believe, or Gange. I'm sorry if I mispronounced that. And then a letter today from Patricia McLaughlin. So I will distribute these now, so you all have those.
and do we want to make them? There are 2 people that have signed in for this meeting to speak, and we will continue that at that time.
Can I sign in too?
Thank you, Michael.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know whether,
I'd like to,
okay.
given what's been exchanging here with the presentation.
Okay. The sign-in will also be available at the next meeting. There were a few other people also. So those people, we will take those people first at the next meeting, date certain, and then we will continue with the public hearing. Okay, now if you can get a motion to,
I move to continue the public hearing for 4 East State Street to Tuesday, May 2nd.
I second.
Jensen, second.
okay, if you could call the roll.
Hartman,
Aye.
Jensen,
Aye.
McManus,
Aye.
Solomon. Stazen,
Aye.
Zelmer.
Aye, motion carries. We've continued the heating,
May I just make a clarification? A request was made to identify where the updates are able to be found by the public, and that's found on the city website, which is geneva.il.us. And you can scroll to the development projects page, and that is where all the documents are available under the 4 East State Street moniker.
Thank you. Yeah, we'll take a 5-minute break. Okay, we are back, and the next item on our agenda is the review of conceptual development plans for 111 Franklin Street. Mr. Lambert.
Thank you, Chairman Zellmer. The project site is located in the southeast corner of the local Geneva Historic District, and is also located in the southeast corner of the Central Geneva Historic District listed in the National Register of Historic Places. The property is located at the corner of First and Franklin Street. So this is a current site plan of the existing property that was submitted by the applicant. And this is the proposal for the lot split, which I will come back to. The house that you're looking at was built sometime around 1869 or 1870 by Carol and Thomas Clark, who moved to Geneva just about the time the Civil War broke out and built this Italianate home. The history of the home is not really well defined until you get into the 20th century, when Italian immigrants, Rizzero Panuzzi and his wife Antonetta, purchased the property in August of 1919. Mr. Panuzzi was a blacksmith and found work as a machinist when his family arrived in Geneva. They raised 4 children in this home. Also at this property, Mr. Panuzzi operated a bicycle shop, and he also invented a special sink that in 1925 received some rather good local attention. In August of 1930, the Panuzzis announced the opening of the Geneva Gardens barbecue and served Italian dinners in their elaborate gardens at the corner of First and Franklin Street. As mentioned in the report, the gardens included a koi pond whose foundation remnants still survive, however, in very poor shape, I may add. In 1932, following the untimely death of her husband, Antonetta assumed the operation of Villa Cafe on Peck Road and closed the Geneva Gardens barbecue. And in 1936, Antonetta Panuzzi actually auctioned off all of her household furnishings and moved to Chicago. The Panuzzi family presumably made several alterations to the home during the mid-1920s. The south windows at the front parlor that matched the front east windows are presumed to have been replaced at that time with a small window. A rear wing was added behind the original kitchen and may have served as a new and larger kitchen for the restaurant operations. The front stair was removed and the original stair hall was reduced to create a first floor bedroom and bathroom. Central heating was added, which necessitated the digging out of the cellar. And we've talked before about Michigan basements. Apparently, the Clark Panuzzi house remained vacant until 1940, when the property was purchased by Margaret Welch and Edward Lloyd, along with an unmarried sister, Laura Welch. It is thought that the Welch family may have completed additional remodeling, including the removal of the wall between the front parlor and the dining room. The next notable owners was the William Park family, who before in 1988 were commissioned an addition to be added to the rear of the home. The one-story addition was finally begun in 1995 and received commission approval. Also, after that time, the commission approved the extension of the south bay window to a full 2 stories. It had been a single-story bay window. So just going around, this is the First Street facade. And then a view looking from Franklin Street towards the northeast. So you're looking at the Franklin Street facade and the 1995 one-story addition that enveloped the Panuzzi second kitchen. Also on the site is a garage which appears to be primarily new construction. It may have a small portion of the original garage included, but it's primarily new construction. And the site also then has these curious concrete fence posts that have an interesting history in and of themselves. I will note that they are outside of the property. They're actually on the public right-of-way, but they are visually part of the property. The history of those cast concrete sidewalks are tied to the house at 327 South First Street, which was the home of Italian immigrant sculptor Silvio Silvestri. For those of you who know that name, he was hired by Colonel and Nellie Fabian of the Fabian Estate as their resident sculptor, and designed several projects for their properties, including the laboratory on the west side of Batavia Avenue. Silvestri is also known for his bronze sculptures, including the foxes that adorn the Main Street Bridge at St. Charles, Illinois. So while we can't tell exactly the provenance of the fence posts, we don't know if these are cast-offs from Mr. Silvestri's fence, in other words, extras, and were given to the Panunzis, or if these were prototypes for Mr. Silvestri's own fence. However, we believe that these decorative posts marked the entrance to the Geneva Gardens barbecue. I also point out, you can see a small glimpse of it, that we do look at landscape features, and this is one of the only documented woven wire fences remaining in Geneva. But again, I would point out this is the fence has migrated out onto the public right-of-way, and it's not actually on the actual property under consideration. It's actually in the public right-of-way. So in the report, I outlined a couple of important elements and ideas, and that is that this lot division is permissible under the Geneva zoning ordinance. It does meet the zoning requirements for a lot split, so the zoning is not under question, or the applicability of doing a lot split. However, for the Commission's review, there are the SOI standards to consider and how this proposed project plays into those standards. The first is that the property is to be used for historic purpose or placed in a new use that requires minimal change to the defining characteristics, and the property is still being proposed to be continued as a single-family residential use. The historic character of a property shall be retained and preserved. The removal of historic materials or alteration of features and spaces that characterize a property shall be avoided. Again, the only request at this point is a lot split and relocating the house. We do not have sufficient information, because this is at the conceptual stage, to really evaluate that standard. Standard 3 is that each property shall be recognized as a physical record of its time, place, and use. And aside from the proposed repositioning of the historic house in the site, again, I would say there's insufficient information to evaluate that standard at this phase. Most historic properties change over time is standard 4, and those changes have acquired historic significance in their own right shall be retained and preserved. The historic house is being proposed to be retained, with the exception of the 1995 wing, which has not attained any significance. There's no known historic event or historic person associated with that 1995 wing. As I pointed out, the yard was once elaborately landscaped and was used for the Geneva Gardens barbecue. However, if you've walked by the site, you can see that most of that historic landscape has disappeared over time, or has matured and died out and been removed. Standard 5 is that distinctive finishes and construction techniques should be preserved, and again, at this conceptual stage, none of that information has been submitted because it hasn't been developed at this point. And similarly for Standard 6 regarding deteriorated features being restored, and Standard 7 regarding chemical and physical treatments, again, there's not sufficient information developed at the conceptual stage. Significant architectural resources affected shall be protected and preserved. At this point, there's no known archaeological artifacts that have been discovered or identified, and so there's no ability to comment on that standard at this point. And again, Standard 9 and 10 referring to new additions and their construction and design have not been designed at this point to present to you, because it's a conceptual development issue. We also have the design guidelines for historic properties, and there are two standards that apply to this particular case. One is that the guidelines call for the preservation of historic buildings, and again, underscoring that, the submitted proposal seeks to preserve the historic portions of the Clark Panunzi House. And the second one is preserving the historic buildings in their original settings. And the proposal is to relocate the house on its historic site, so it's staying on its historic site with its historic orientation. And the commission can comment, and I'm sure the applicant is going to talk more about how it's being cited and how it will be viewed in its new location. So with that, the only other thing I would like to point out before I turn it over is that it was brought to our attention by the electrical division, just as part of your consideration, is that electrical service to the house can either be to the relocated house has two different routes it can be brought to the house. So that is sometimes a concern when we relocate houses or split lots, is how we get utilities to them. And it appears that with this lot split and with the relocated house, we can service the property with public utilities. So with that, I would turn the lectern over to Steve Kuhn, who is the applicant, and I think he has a presentation as well.
Kind of presentation, just some photos. Again, thank you, Michael. Very conceptual right now, and I wanted to engage everybody early on in the process to make sure that if there's some objections or some comments or some ideas or suggestions that we get involved with you early on versus I'm trying to be a little thrifty too and not overextend myself financially with architectural plans in detail. Just a little bit I've done is already like $1,000 just to do the hand sketch. So the two main points though that I want to kind of get your feeling for, and if you have any thoughts or questions, is one, I mean, dividing the lot, as you said, is within the zoning rules and everything. But in order to accomplish that and make it look right, is the relocation of the house. And also it would allow for a new foundation. And Michael, you've been in that house, and it's a very old, fragile foundation that does leak. So those two things, by moving it, it allows for lot division as I foresee it, and then also for an addition. And one of the things too, let me try to bring up the pictures here. What button do I hit again? What button is it? Sorry. Was it this one?
Yeah.
Yep.
And then just hit the present button. Sorry, the present button down here. There you go.
There. Okay. I took some pictures too. So one of the key things, and I've learned by listening to you guys online and having many meetings with Michael and stuff, that it's very important, which I don't disagree with whatsoever, is to not impact the historic facades that are visible from the street. So obviously, this side-facing portion, I don't know if I have a mouse here, from this point right about here to here is historic. So we do not want to impact that from visibility. The other thing that I wanted to show here was trying to close to line up the houses that are adjacent to it. Got another view. You can see how it sits back right now, which is necessary for me to do what I think should be done to be aesthetically pleasing, is to line up the house with these. There's 3 houses right here in a line that you can see, and pretty much line it up with those houses on the street. There you can see as well how far it sits back, and then also it's relatively close to the house next door. And the owner of the house next door, Jim, is very for this. He's like, oh, great, because it is relatively close. So he even wrote a letter that I'll show you at the very end that just supports, or a text that just supports this. What I also wanted to show is the property does grade down to a degree, but it really doesn't grade down significantly until about here. You can see how it really drops here. But this area here is not terribly lower than where it sits now. And I think, and again, I'm not an architect or anything, but my thinking is we can keep the elevation, the height, relatively the same. I know there's questions, Michael, you brought it up, is if we have some foundation showing, how do we make that pleasing so it ties in? And I'm open to any suggestions on that. The architect can chime into that. Again, I'm trying to keep the historic portion of the house pleasing and historic. But I did want to point out that even though it sits here, moving it to this general area here isn't a huge grade drop. And again, I don't have a topography survey yet, which I will get, and we'll know exactly what it is. But I just wanted to have this exposure to you guys. Also, keep in mind the property line, Michael, I think it's like right about here. So from here to the side, or to the curb, is about 30 feet. So you got 30 feet there, and then by zoning, we have to have another 20 feet from here. So the side of the house would be somewhere in this general area. So you'd have 50 feet still from street, curb to edge of house. So you can see we'd move it up, and Michael made it very clear, and I appreciate and understand that the porch itself should not extend beyond even though this is enclosed porch next door. He said, don't extend that, because typically, I guess, porches are outside of setbacks, right, Michael? Yeah. But in this case, even though it's an open porch, that technically by zoning, you could have it closer. But in this case, we don't want it to extend beyond the houses that it aligns with. Again, this is just kind of showing, who's that beautiful yellow house? This kind of shows it's kind of real, kind of hard to see, but it doesn't drop as you would think from where the house sits now. And this is the general area here that we're talking about where the house would be. Again, I tried to show it does drop a little bit going this way as well, but it's consistent drop this way. Again, here's where the drop is, and the house would be inside, well inside that drop.
I think it's a little bit more than you think it is. You'd be surprised.
Yeah, I mean, I know it is. Yeah, I know it is.
Just looking at that and looking at the property.
Your mic. Turn on your mic.
And looking at the property, I think it's a little bit more than you think it is.
Yeah, I'm not trying to say it's not. I'm just saying it's not. It's a little deceiving because there's a huge drop right here at the edge.
Yeah,
at the edge. Again, this kind of gives you a look, and you're absolutely right. This point right here versus if the house, that corner sits right here, there is a bit of a drop, and that's where Michael said, if we try to keep the height relatively the same, there might be a little exposure of the foundation, or I think, Michael, you even said potentially you could have a little bit of a walkout or a lookout type setup there. I think it's
To clarify that, I said, depending on how the grade is, and you couldn't expose it all the way to the standards, but you might want to bring the grade around that exposed portion of it. So there's, again, those are the details that would have to be
He was just
worked
throwing
out.
that out. I'm not trying to,
So-
yeah. is
Point
possible.
of clarification, we're talking the same height. Are you talking about the first floor elevation being the same as it is now in the relocation? So that would increase the foundation
Yeah.
wall height, is that?
If that is a concern of the committee, that it stays relatively the same, yes. But if you say, no, it's not going to drop that much, we'd rather have the same exposure of the foundation, then that's the kind of feedback and input that I'm looking for. Because it has nothing's been hard designed at this point, but I'm just trying to get, those are good comments. If you say, yeah, my personal opinion, I would like to see it, kind of maintain the same exposure, even though it might drop the overall height by 2 feet or whatever it is.
Speaking for myself as an architect, until I studied the elevations, I couldn't give you any guidance on that at all.
Yeah, and I haven't.
Excuse me, I'm going to interject. I could be wrong on this, but isn't the city going to give us top of foundation from top of curb on a relocation? Aren't they going to dictate the top of foundation?
I didn't bring that piece of information with me, but I believe it is set in this district, I believe it's set by the neighboring properties as an average.
The overall height.
The top of foundation and the
Top of
overall height.
foundation.
It's a combination of them.
But the top of foundation is going to be set by, it's not going to be set by us.
Okay.
It could
And
be
not by
a
me then
range
either.
too, right? I mean,
Right, there's an average that you have to meet, and again, again, I didn't bring that part of the,
But, there are many options on your exposed foundation, whether you do a brick ledge and, a limestone, exposed limestone
Right.
wall, veneer, you can call it whatever you want. There's a lot of options.
Yeah, and I like the limestone idea because that's kind of the look that it has
Yeah,
now.
right,
So that would be my intention, is to try to not make it look like, oh, they just plopped a house on a brand-new foundation. Look at that concrete
I
foundation.
just don't know what role that will play on the exposure of the foundation.
again, I think what's Mr. Kuhn's looking for at this point is your general feedback as to if there's a concern about more foundation be exposed or if it should be less foundation, just to give some general parameters. You're right, the code is going to set certain limitations, but you're going to have the final say on if the foundation's exposed, what the appearance of that foundation is. If, for instance, he says that he's going to wrap 10 feet of the south side with the existing grade, but he does want to drop it down to get a English basement, would you approve that? Would you not? Do you favor that or not? At this point, I think that's the direction.
I'm working with
that Ms.
Dan
Kuhn's
Marshall, who I'm sure everyone knows, and he's, I think, very knowledgeable and experienced with working with you guys as well. So I'm sure that'll get his input with your input. And again, the whole design structure-wise, I'm a ways away from that. And I just wanted to the 2 points I wanted to make is my intentions would be, I want to divide the lot. In order to do that properly and aesthetically pleasing, relocate the house. That way I can also put an addition to the north, coming, not keeping the sides of the south side and the east, or the west, or the east side of the house, fully exposed and distinguished from any addition. And obviously, I can't do that where it sits now, because the only direction I can go is south.
yeah.
And
Can you take us back to that sketch that shows the
Yeah,
sites
it would
with
be
the
nice
color
to see the
coordinates?
site.
yeah, I can do that. I got it in here.
Because it looks like you're going to lose a substantial portion of your existing building. Is there a demo involved in this?
Yeah,
That
the-
color,
That
yeah, there.
There it is, yeah.
the 1995 edition, which is basically that long, narrow, maybe I can get this.
Well,
this
it's almost a
this
T,
right here.
right?
Yeah,
This piece right here
Right.
is going to go away.
But that other piece is in the new garage, right? that
piece.
connects that vertical, there is a horizontal link
Yes.
right there. That's part of the new garage, right?
No, that's,
Garage is in the back.
that's historic, and that portion is right here.
Is there,
Then that elevation line doesn't line up from the projection on the pink. Something's not lining up correctly there. It's different.
Well, it moves this direction, and it moves this direction.
I think he's talking about the pink lines are
Yeah,
not exactly
yeah.
the
See,
same.
after that projection.
Oh, I see what you're
The
saying.
distance of that pink line is much longer there
Yeah,
than it is
yeah,
on the
this-
yellow one.
This,
So something's not right there.
I'll get some money back from Dan then, 'cause
Yeah, I get
It was a quick sketch.
we lost
Yeah.
something here.
Yeah.
paid $900 for that.
Yeah, you got every dime.
So, yeah, you're absolutely right. But I think conceptually, this, whichever one is correct,
That's why I thought we
this
were
purple
losing
is supposed
more
to,
there.
is supposed to mimic, this.
The pink is closer to being correct with what's out there.
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah, I think you're right, because there is a porch right here.
Yes.
And the yellow
I think-
square
I don't
is,
think he's really showing the porch here, is he?
Maybe
I
the
don't know.
porch is supposed to be forward of that.
yeah.
Is there a reason why you hugged the southernmost edge of that? I mean,
Well, because, yes, we're trying to designate this area as backyard.
okay.
And we also want to be able to put an addition off this north side of the house and still retain some of the backyard. And Jim, the neighbor here, is very happy about that.
Yeah, yeah.
And that big yellow square just defines your building setback lines?
Yeah, this is, yeah, exactly.
So you have 6 in that side or rear on this case?
That's 25 feet right
Yeah.
here.
No, I'm talking about by the new garage to the other property. I see 6.
6, that's the setback, because
Is that designated
the
side
side,
yard then?
yeah.
So
Yep.
just to explain for everybody, because this is a nuance of Geneva,
Zoning,
the narrowest dimension on a lot is the front yard. It does not have anything to do with where the front door of a building is. The narrowest lot. So the Franklin Street is 97.9 or 7.
97.9, yeah.
And the First Street side is 105.
105.
So
Got it.
that makes the rear yard to the north.
So
Yep.
that's a side yard setback?
Yes.
Yep.
Okay.
So, yeah, you're right, that's good eye on that. Well, you're an architect, you would catch that. So, yeah, the intention is to try to maximize a backyard and still have room for an addition. Has anybody ever been in this house, said Michael? Yeah. Yeah, so you kind of know what you're dealing with on the inside. One of the things that they had, they took out, there used to be, according to Michael, which makes sense visibly when you look at it, there used to be a staircase off the entry. They took that out and made it a bedroom, and there's this really small, I don't even know how, I have renters in there right now, I don't know how they get furniture up to the second floor. I mean, it's really, really, really tight. So my intention would be to rebuild the stairs where they used to be. And then probably eliminate the rear staircase if it has to be, and then have some sort of open access to an addition here, and then upstairs also have access to the second level area here for maybe another bedroom, because the bedrooms, there's only 2 bedrooms upstairs right now. So yeah, the idea would be to put an original type looking staircase back in here.
If I may interrupt you while I've got this image up before you move. I mentioned that the Panunzi's added a second kitchen, and that, just for disclosure for everybody, that second kitchen was located in that long yellow rectangle. However, the 1995 remodeling of it destroyed everything except for some framing, I think some flooring. So that addition that I mentioned that the Panunzis did, it does not exist in any kind of three-dimensional form anymore, just to clarify that.
And Michael said that one time, I think this area right here was the kitchen, right?
Yes.
This was some sort of kitchen, yeah. And again, we don't know how we're going to change that up at this point, but again, externally, it will all be the same, tidied up, whatever we can do to tidy it up. Again, this area here proposes for garage, so coming off here for garage. Again, don't hold me to these blue boxes, it could be a little bit different, and,
Yeah,
you know.
I would look at least trying to get some relief from the garage, from the front plane out of the second front plane, if you will.
You're talking about this line right here.
That line going,
Can
that,
you go forward with it if you push the house back a little bit? Versus do
No,
you have to go back?
I would want to go back because I would want to have the house, the corner of that house be defined, if you will.
And the challenge there is the slope of that driveway then.
Well,
given,
yeah, that will be
the
a challenge,
further-
but
Yeah, the closer you get to the street.
Yeah.
That's gonna be a significant
guess-
slope there.
The grade there, yeah.
Yeah.
It might be where and again, I'm not an architect or anything, it might be that garage is graded
You have
down
to
a little
drop
bit.
it
Yeah,
down.
and then you have a couple, handful of steps inside the garage to get to the house level. Those kind of details you'll see at some point, but I think the key thing is the intention of getting it here and then getting your kind of, I think we can work with that. But then having a topography presented so we can kind of see what's the elevation. And then once we see that, we can start going, okay, how would we design the addition of a garage and something over here? How would that all tie in to the existing?
Sure.
Again, keeping the addition set back here for sure. And like you said, we can set this back here because we got room over here to do that.
yeah, that would be my comment about that. I mean, I kind of like to have it a little farther off, just not right on the face of the setback, but I understand what you're saying, and I think that dealing with Mr. Hartman's comment, I think that you should be able to figure out where that line is going to be, right? With a little with doing a topographic survey. and
What line are you talking about?
The line of the first floor foundation
Yeah,
line.
and where the garage has to sit based
Well,
on slope?
Yeah,
Or-
just that between finding out with a little more work, but I don't have a real problem with moving the house at all, because I'd be shocked if this would be probably the only house that hasn't been moved in Geneva. Every house seems to be moved in Geneva, so.
Believe me, I'd make it look cool. I mean, I wouldn't.
Yeah,
wouldn't-
it's in your best interest, and I know
Yeah.
you would, so,
I wouldn't,
yeah.
and that's why I'm trying to meet with you now. It's
Yeah.
just kind of, hey, am I missing something? Because I don't
Hey,
sit in your
do-
chairs.
What does the commission think of the being right on the property line, or the setback line at that point? Or is there an opinion about that? I do get your point of the backyard or lack.
No, especially since that side of the house is quite flattering.
Yeah,
I don't see a problem with that. I do agree with the garage, and I think also if you move that garage back more to further make the house more prominent,
Right.
you may also be able to come up with a creative way of tying those two additional spaces together.
Yeah, Dan kind of mentioned that. He said there's kind of a roof line issue that and maybe if we had to drop it, it kind of might present a better
Well, the other thing is
opportunity
too,
to connect the houses.
is that you're gonna end up having a dead space behind the garage and then with the proposed addition, whatever, if you move the garage back, you may come up with just a small kind of a sliver that you could just square off and maybe have a workshop or something back
Yeah,
there.
yeah. Yeah,
kinda
with
tie
a,
those
with a
two.
door in the back to get
Yeah,
your
your
lawnmower and all
so
that.
that you don't have to go all the way around and.
Yeah,
And we all know it's cheaper to build a box.
yep,
Yeah,
yep. Well, you can notice these are boxes right here.
yeah. Yep.
That's a real good idea. I will bring that to Dan.
Plus, the other thing is too, it kind of negates by moving that back, it softens the amount of incline you're going to have going up the driveway
Yeah.
into the garage, because
Yeah.
you're going to be stretching it out more. So it'll be less of a ski ramp.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah, the real climb is like right about here. is
Yeah.
Where the real climb
Yeah.
is. So yeah, we'll work those details out and run it by you guys, of course.
Sure.
But it's, we need the topo before we can
Yeah.
Yeah.
figure
And for
that out.
presentation purposes, I think I designate that one area as being removed from the existing. It certainly would help your visibility. The vertical part we talked about, so you know what's going and what's staying. And I would get the shape a little better of the existing home to represent the other one.
Yeah,
That's
I
what
think
really
the next step,
confused
if you
the heck
guys
out of me.
don't throw a big red flag in front of me, I think the next step would be to get more detailed
Okay.
drawings.
Yeah,
And then kind of run that by you and say, okay, here's the next step.
Okay.
And then I have no concept whatsoever yet with this property.
Uh-huh.
I have no concept. I may just sell it, and let someone else deal with that.
do you know what the?
Or I may develop it.
That's a valid lot, right? That's a valid lot that can be built on though, right?
Yeah, I think that, what is it,
82.3 is right now, and it's 80 is the,
I think 8,400, I think, was what we used to,
yeah, I think we marked it as 8,400 on this.
or 8,405 or something.
This lot is 10,000 something on the corner. But yeah, and the only other thing, that kind of gives you an overhead.
Oh, okay,
Kind of shows you, again, that's without any addition.
right. Okay.
There's the neighbor's comment. I thought it was important to ask him.
Sure.
If he had any concerns. There's the quarry pond that's really seen better days.
Oh,
I think it was in many more recent years, it's been some sort of garden or something. You know where the property really drops is when you get just past that quarry pond concrete area, it really drops
yeah,
over
both
over
ways.
that way in that corner.
Can I ask about the trees? How many trees are you taking out?
The trees were designated this fall, the ones I had come out that were either in danger of falling or were dead, they've already been removed.
But aren't you going to need to remove one more?
I don't believe so. I think what you see, all that, well, when that property is developed, maybe couple of those, maybe the two there, maybe. I'm not even thinking that far ahead right now with that. But I was just concerned about the,
I thought there was a tree in the back that you were going to need to.
well, yeah, and I didn't do anything with that one. You're absolutely right, because that one's leaning right up against the, addition, the 95 addition. And I didn't worry about that because the 95 addition in my idea plan is coming down. So maybe that tree wouldn't have to be removed if that's gone, if the addition's gone. Because you're absolutely right, it's almost touching the house.
Yeah.
I think you're talking about, you can't see it from here, but it's this one right here.
Well, the one I was talking about is the one that's right in, what it looks like it's in the front yard.
There?
That one is the one I was concerned about.
That's actually on his property.
Oh, it is? Oh, okay.
If I can get to the front of the, yeah, it's this.
those two trees are on his property?
This one may not be, but according to, I had someone come out to just talk to about what's involved in moving a house, and he said he thought we didn't have to move that tree, this one. But this one is in his yard.
Okay.
I'm almost positive, Don't quote me on that, I could be wrong. But this one for sure is far enough away from the house. This one is close, but because the house would go this way, it sounded like they weren't worried about it. And if it has to go up before it goes over, they felt that it was okay. I could be wrong. There was a limb on maybe that tree that was kind of hanging this way almost. I had that limb removed when I had these trees right here removed.
Now, obviously, the front of the house will be some number of feet to the south. At the present moment, you have the two concrete pillars that line up with the front walk that goes to the house. Are you going to move the pillars? Are you going to leave the pillars?
Those are actually wood. Yeah, they're actually wood, and I think they're more contemporary.
Oh, I
know when they were
I
put
thought they
in.
were like the one that's on the
No,
side.
no, they're
this is
different
now-
than the ones on the side.
I see, okay,
The First
And-
Street ones are wood. and
They're
the
wood.
Franklin are concrete.
Yeah.
And they, yeah.
okay. And the decorative one is concrete.
And I have pictures of, I wanted to show you that because that won't survive what I
Right.
need to do. So there's one in pretty good shape. That's the one that's in pretty good shape. And my plan would be to preserve it. I don't know where it would go because that would kind of be in the way of a driveway. So I don't know if that's where you guys could chime in and say, what if you did this? I don't know. Does it become part of a corner post on the property towards the front? Or, technically it is in the city property.
Oh,
So I don't know if
that's
that
true.
means it's yours or you
That's,
can move it.
that's a very big question on lots of properties in the city. There's a lot of things that encroach the current right-of-ways.
That one's not so good.
That's the other one that they've tried to epoxy it or whatever.
Yeah.
I think if you try to move that, I don't know how well it would move.
Get a plaster cast on that?
Yeah.
Well, you could do the other one.
Yeah.
But this one seems fairly solid. Yeah. Now,
Can I make a quick comment about that, if you don't mind?
You'll have to step up to the,
Sure.
and state your name, Al.
Al Watts with Preservation Partners of the Fox Valley. I just wanted to mention about that concrete post. The guy who made those, he made all the concrete sculptures that are at the Fabian property, and the Preservation Partners operates the Fabian estate for the public, and we are in the process of getting a grant to be able to take a look at all of those concrete structures that are there to see what it would cost to repair. So if you want, you're gonna have to pay for that if they let them go over to your place. But if you want them to take a look at that while they're already in Geneva sometime, I don't know when it's gonna happen. I have to get the grant first, but.
yeah, maybe give me the contact information. I'm
Yeah.
not there yet.
Right.
And is it something that, could that be donated to you guys or? input?
It depends on who owns it.
Yeah.
I think that's a question to get into the details.
Yeah. I'm just pointing out that all I wanted to
You've
do
got
is
an
let you know that.
No, I appreciate that, yeah.
We can do that.
Can we go back to the photograph of all of the metal fencing?
I think that's where he's going next.
Okay. Okay, now, did one of you talk about how this metal fencing is historic?
Michael said.
Yeah.
What did you say here, Michael?
You're going to put me on the spot, aren't you? No, woven wire fencing was a standard fencing in the late 19th century through the early 20th century. And we don't have many woven wire fences left in Geneva. So one of the things that is in our standards is to preserve historic landscape elements. Now, that doesn't mean that the fence will probably not be allowed to stay where it's at because it's in the public right-of-way, and we try to remove things from the public right-of-way when we can. I just pointed out that we don't have a lot of historic fences to begin with in Geneva. Most of them are newer fences that replicate historic designs. And I just pointed out because the fence is there, it is a landscape feature, whether it's worthy of being preserved or whether it's being recorded or whether a portion of it is saved elsewhere. I just wanted you to be aware that this particular property does have some landscape features. It's your decision what happens to them.
And this is next to the garage rolled up, so there must have been more fencing on the property.
Probably.
That they just rolled it up and put it next to the garage.
Yeah.
So if it has historic value, it has, sitting there like that has no value to me. And I don't know if it means somebody else would love to have it. You guys, you know, you can put that out there. Because I don't see where I would use it. I don't want to scrap it, though. So somebody might say, yeah, I'm doing this, or I'm doing that somewhere else, or maybe another area of the county says we'd love to see it here for whatever reason. There it sits, and it's probably been there for a long time, rolled up next to the garage.
Okay, thank you.
So that's really it, and I really appreciate you hearing me out. Again, very, very early stages. Just kind of wanted to, I didn't want to come out with a full design, and here's what it is, and here's the addition, and it's just so much to take in at one time. I think if you, based on what I'm hearing, it's kind of like, okay, take it to the next step, and let's get a topography, let's get a little better sketch that isn't a hand sketch of what this would look like.
So what are we doing today, Michael? Are we voting on something, or
No,
are
we're
we
not
providing
voting
a
on anything.
recommendation?
We're just giving the recommendations,
Okay.
or if we have any feedback for what he's planning.
Yeah, okay.
And I think that the feedback I think you've got the feedback you're
Exactly.
looking for. I think that if, you know, you're going to have to look at it a little more in depth. I think the idea of pulling it forward is a great idea, and I think, you know,
Yeah.
I think going down in that corner is not, I don't think that's a problem. I mean, it just is, I'd be careful about, you know, like
Sight
Don
lines
said,
and-
sight lines and
Yeah.
stuff like that. So a little.
I just wanted to make sure that I didn't go forward with this, and all of a sudden you go, no, you
No.
got to turn the house this way. Like,
No.
what? You know,
Yeah.
that's, so,
I think we're typically interested in maintaining the original house, that facade stays prominent, and any additions just kind of, you know,
take second.
yeah,
Fiddle to
exactly.
Blend in.
So on the Franklin side, though, with the, I don't know, I don't know if we're really interested in the side, because the address is Franklin. So the front of the house is technically what's on the Franklin side. So in my mind, I would think that the garage would want to be a little behind.
Yeah.
I would like,
That's what, yeah, I think someone else was mentioning that.
Yeah.
I think the garage should be pushed back as far as you can so that the original, the side of the original house is more prominent.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, I want to keep that, I want to keep the Franklin side as you see it, the historic portion. You know, clearly this was the old part of the house.
Yeah.
Right now, as it sits, you know, you have that addition, so that addition that you see on there now is going to be replaced more or less with a garage.
Yeah.
But that addition now sticks forward,
Right.
but I hear what you're saying, let's push it back.
Yeah,
I think you get a couple things with that. You
Yeah.
get some help with grading, but,
Yeah.
yeah, I think that's kind of what we were looking at, and that's the
I think there's
starting.
room to do that, and
Yeah, I
it's
think
up to
there
the
is.
architect to try to line up the,
We have a clarification, though, on, it seems that we do have a consensus on separating the two parcels.
Yeah, I don't think we have a problem with that. I mean, that's
by
by,
right.
by right. He
Well,
can do that, yeah.
Wasn't that the initial thing that was on the docket here was about separation of parcels?
Development of a contributing property, including division of the lot
Yes.
and relocation of a historic house.
Can't really do it without relocating it, so.
Yeah.
The actual act of dividing it is not up to question. I was pointing out that the lot is being divided to accomplish what the request
Okay,
is.
okay,
The
so
lot is, the lot meets
that's what you
zoning.
mentioned initially.
Right.
Okay,
Yeah,
so that's beyond our purview to begin with.
Correct.
But if you can't move the house, then you couldn't,
that's correct.
Yeah.
If
That's correct.
Okay.
That is correct. Yes.
So Steve, you are going to keep the Franklin Street address?
yeah, I don't plan to change that.
Okay.
Yeah.
And just to clarify that, because I just want to clarify the historic record. It was 227 South First Street until sometime in the mid-20th century. It changed sometime after 1930, if I remember right, to the Franklin Street address. It was 227 South First Street historically.
Is it okay to keep the Franklin address?
The addresses would be assigned by the city. We have someone who signs those. So you could keep it as a, if you wanted to go back to 227 South First, you could petition for that. You could make it up 111, and then you'll get a new address for the new lot. So, I mean, there's
I mean,
options.
I prefer to keep the Franklin address.
I was just thinking about the garage, because if it went back to the First Street, then that would be the front of the house, as opposed to Franklin being the front of the house.
The doors on the.
I think that's just, the front of it depends on what, that's an architectural
Front
item.
of the house is the long, or the shortest portion.
That's a zoning thing, though.
Yeah, and I've always been told it doesn't matter, the door can be wherever you want it.
I think even so, though, with an addition, though, regardless of whether it's the front of the house or, it's visible, it's original, and we would want to see an addition setback from that.
You can correct me if I'm wrong, but I think what Commissioner Jensen's comment was that the historic front does face First Street, and so if that got a First Street address, it would, for the casual passerby, the First Street address would indicate the historic front facade, as opposed to the side facade. And then your new house, or the new house on the new lot, would have a Franklin Street address. I don't think it's a big issue. I think that's really going to be a discussion between you, the person who signs the addresses, and the fire department, quite honestly.
Okay, yeah.
I mean, I'm okay with what you have submitted as far as what's
Appreciate it.
proposed, yeah.
Yeah, I know it's very general, but I appreciate that. Yeah.
I think when you go to the next level and you get, the topography done and that, I think that's going to open up a lot of ideas.
Yeah.
And a lot of issues.
Yeah. And I didn't want to take that step if there was something I'm totally missing, but it doesn't sound like I am.
No, I think you're in good shape to go to the next
Go to the
level.
next step.
And the next step, and,
I appreciate that.
yeah.
All right.
Just on a side note, I think it would be really great if you did reinstate that staircase in the front, well, it would be on First Street, the
That is
original
100%
one.
my plan.
Yeah, as opposed to the one that is currently there.
Yeah, yeah, you've been in it, right?
Mhm.
Yeah, it's not a real functioning, it's dangerous.
It is very dangerous.
Yeah.
And you're right, I don't know how you would get furniture up there.
I don't know either.
Oh.
I heard that the people that moved out had to go through a window.
Oh.
Yeah.
I've seen that.
Have you? Yeah. And I believe it because the curtains were all tied back in that room, and they weren't put back. All right, well, thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Really appreciate it.
Thank you for coming in.
Yep.
Okay. Let me turn his presentation off. You'll need.
Steve, can you close out your presentation, please?
Yes.
Thank you.
Sorry, bear with me.
Okay, next on our agenda is the secretary's report.
I don't have a lot this evening to share, but I do have two things I would like to acknowledge. One is to acknowledge Kristen, who has been our recording secretary, has just gotten into the swing of things, and her work schedule has changed, and she will be leaving us. So I do want to thank you for your time in getting to know what we do and how we do it.
Oh, my gosh.
Oh.
So, and we'll look forward to seeing you around and maybe back once in a while, because you've agreed to substitute when we need. So, and the other one is a thank you and a goodbye to our Commissioner Carolyn Zinke. And I just wrote this little bit that I wanted to read. And Carolyn, as you step down from this commission, you should be experiencing both satisfaction and a sense of accomplishment. For more than a decade, you have been a strong and sometimes outspoken voice for preservation in the Geneva community. As a commissioner, you have made a great effort to be informed about the overall process and responsibilities of this commission. Importantly, you have taken your role seriously and consistently, acquainting yourself with the details of each individual project. If you have not visited each of the 300-plus properties that you have reviewed as a commissioner, I would venture a guess that you have visited at least 90% of those sites personally. Admirably, you have not been afraid to speak your mind and, when necessary, stand alone in your opinion. Over the past 11 years and 9 months, you have progressed from novice to senior statesman on the commission. Your understanding of the professional application of preservation standards has evolved and matured. You and your work here will continue to inspire those commissioners who follow you. You have done good work for the Geneva community, particularly the preservation community. In closing, your retirement represents the departure of the last of the original commissioners that I, quote-unquote, inherited upon my arrival here more than a decade ago. So Carolyn, I personally want to say thank you for your service, take pride in your achievements, and enjoy the extra time to pursue your personal passions. So thank you.
You're here.
Thank you.
Thank you for your kind remarks. And you probably don't remember, but I was one of the people who interviewed you.
I do remember. I almost put that in there. I can remember where everyone sat and what the questions were they asked me.
Very good.
So where are you headed, Carolyn? Are you just stepping
I'm not
down,
head-
or
I'm-
just?
I've been on the commission 11 years and 9 months, 10 months, and my term is over. And I thought, since my husband and I are planning on moving into Batavia within the next 2 to 2.5 years, I thought it would be better not to ask for a new term.
Batavia.
Although it's been really, I can't tell you how much I've enjoyed this. I have. I really have. But Preservation Partners and I are going to have a conversation next week.
Very good.
We're going to take her off.
Yeah, very good.
Thank you, sir.
So now you'll be standing at that podium.
Yes, I probably will. Yeah, when you have your next meeting about the Mill Race Inn, I will be able to stand there and say what I have to say.
If we say the wrong thing, you'll give us the stink eye?
I think that, but thank you so much for your
Thanks, Carol.
service, though.
Thank you. It's nice to hear these nice things. I appreciate that.
Okay. New business from the commission? Or do you have anything, you don't have anything else? That's your report? Okay. New business from the commission? Okay, and then from the public? Nothing from the public, okay. With that, can I get a motion to adjourn?
Motion to adjourn.
Second.
Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
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 We're adjourned.